Good morning or afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Moore. I'm going to be the webinar host for today and moderator of our panel talking about the dark secrets of running a Gauge network. So we're going to give just a couple minutes for everyone else to settle in, and we're looking for one more panelist as well, but we will get started shortly. Thanks. Okay, before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know we will be holding our Texas webinar in person on February 9th and 10th. It's going to be in San Marcos, Texas. It was originally scheduled for October, but for COVID reasons, we pushed it back to February. It's a great workshop. I encourage anyone who's interested in anything we talk about on these webinars or NHWC to attend. We're going to be talking anything from running Gauge networks to modeling to, engineering. So it's a really great place to meet other people in the field or catch up. And again, that's scheduled for February 9th and 10th. That's at the Embassy Suites in San Marcos, Texas. You can find it on the NHWC website shown here, just under conferences and training. And we've got links to the hotel, registration, and even a discounted rate if you reserve through the link. So if you ever have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to share more information, but it's definitely a worthwhile workshop to attend. On the other side of things, our website's constantly being updated and refreshed. We're always looking for suggestions. So if you guys ever have any questions or comments about our website, about membership, if you are a member and you have something you want to suggest, or if you're interested in becoming a member of the NHWC, again, feel free to reach out to anyone that you can find on our website, to me directly, to the board of directors, and we'd be happy to assist. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get this webinar started. Let me make sure I can appropriately switch over to webcam views so you can see all of our faces. Just a moment. Sorry about that, everyone. I believe you should be able to see our faces now. If not, just write a quick comment in the chat and we will attempt to address that. Actually. All right, so yeah, just comment in the chat if there's any questions. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I think the best way to move forward is just to do a quick introduction about who you are, how you got into this work, and a little bit about your system. So let's start with you, Jeff, if you can kind of give us a rundown of how you got to where you are.
Okay. Yeah, I've been doing this for quite a while, 18 years in not necessarily this role. I'm actually a meteorologist, and that's how I came into Harris County as a meteorologist. And then after Hurricane Ike, we had significant damage to our at then legacy alert system, and there was a study completed by the county to look at how we could improve our alert system and our data acquisition platforms and produce better data. Because for those of you who run large alert systems, you know when you have significant weather events, you can lose a lot of it, a lot of the data due to the collisions and the data transfer. And so we took a look at that, and there was a lot of recommendations. One of which was to bring the system under the flood control district. At that time, it was under the Office of Emergency Management, and to bring it under the flood control district. And I guess however you want to look at it, I was the fortunate one to be put in charge of it. And then we went through several years of upgrading the system, specifically the field aspect of it, moving from the legacy alert to the Alert 2 protocol, which was a kind of cutting edge operation at that time. This was back in 2009, 10, and 11. And at that time, there was, I think, only one other system, and that was Denver with Kevin, who had transitioned to Alert 2, but he had left his legacy alert running at the same time, so you could compare both of the data streams coming in. We made the decision to just go ahead and switch completely over to Alert 2 and not leave the legacy system running. And at the same time, we upgraded a lot of our field equipment. We moved from standpipes over to the NEMA box configuration. We upgraded our antenna systems. We upgraded a lot of our water level device systems, brought on radars. At that time, radars were somewhat relatively new to the field. And we started, putting some of those out and collecting data with those. And then we had the big test of the system in 2016 with multiple floods, and then of course 2017 with Harvey, which was by far the biggest test any system probably has faced. And so it did very well. We were very, very happy with the amount of data we passed through our system in one of the worst floods we've ever faced. And I think, Mark, if I remember correctly, it was something like 99.5% of our data came through during Harvey. And so since then, since 2017 and Harvey, we've had a little bit more expansion of the system, especially in the outer counties, not so much in our county, but in the surrounding counties where we're involved with interlocal agreements with those counties to expand the network into a more regional aspect. And then also starting to move into areas that aren't traditionally what you think of as flood warning aspects. And so really when you think about an alert system or a flood warning system, you think about rainfall and water level. And we have all of that at most of our sites. And then we've slowly over the past several years moved more into soil moisture sensors. We've been looking at some of those. And also more recently with technological advances, discharge velocity sensors. They're called RQ30 sensors. They measure the velocity of the channel and then in real time can compute a flow or a discharge at locations. And so we've been working with those. We have had some success with them, but we're still kind of looking at the data and making sure they're matching up well with our more normal measurements that we take with the ADCP equipment or the boat equipment that we can take out and put into a channel. So it's kind of an overview of everything, Mark.
Great. Before we jump to you, Matt, let me see if I can get Kevin Stewart on here because he is our third attendee as a panelist. So just a moment. I'm going to make him a panelist from the audience and we'll see if that works. So with that said, Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and your system?
Hey, I'm Matt Friedberg. I'm the flood warning system operator for the Dona County Flood Commission in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I've been in this field about 2.5 years now. I came into it from academia. I've done a number of software and hardware related things in the past, and this became an opportunity to kind of do a job that used both, and I get to play outside in the dirt a lot. So here, we started our system in 2014. And for us, it was partially in response to a flooding event the year prior in which a dam breached. But largely it was initiated by us internally wanting to be able to get some actual real-time flood data for what happens. We're a system, we're 30 alert 2 gauges. We've been lucky, we're alert. We built out the entire system as alert 2 originally. And then we also bring in data from almost 30 additional sites of other agencies, meet our airport sites, SCADA weather stations from irrigation districts, other federal agencies. So we kind of run an integrated, bring in a lot of data from a lot of different places to make up our system, in part because we're covering a geographical area that's very large. So that's, and here I'm a one-man show here where I end up doing everything, both running the system as well as the field maintenance and installation and everything else that goes with that.
Wow, yeah, and it's a lot to handle. Thanks, Matt. Kevin, can you give us a little bit about the background of who you are and your system and how you got to where you're at?
Sure. My background's civil engineering. I, came out of Iowa and moved to Denver in 1981. Then I was in, I'd done some work with the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District, now the Mile High Flood District at that time, and then was employed by them in the floodplain management program in 1984. And one of the first tasks that I was assigned as part of the staff, engineering staff at the district, was to develop our flood warning capabilities, which were already in place when I got here. I guess we'll go into that a little bit later. I've got some notes on that and can share that with you. But my background really started on my first day of arrival in June of 1984, being introduced to what ALERT was all about, or at least having a stack of equipment that I was tasked with deploying. And then it started, I always like to say it started having babies after that. It just started growing. The district that I work for covers a 7-county area, or portions of all of the city and county of Denver and portions of the 6 surrounding counties. We've been in operation, our agency's been in existence since 1969. And when it came to really growing the system, I was looking to Houston. I was looking to the Harris County Flood Control District, met with them in Austin in 1988, became part of something called the Southwestern Association of Alert Systems. We all kind of shared different leadership roles from, treasurer and secretary and president. So I've been involved with the alert community and the flood warning community really strongly since 1988, when I first met the people in Harris County. So they were kind of my mentors and introduction to the world, and they were looking at us as one of the early starts, and that they could learn something from us as well. So it really was a two-way street back in those early days of getting started. Then, of course, that led to the formation of the National Hydrologic Warning Council, which I was part of in those early years, and working with the Weather Service on modernization efforts and those kind of things. So I really ended up being involved with a lot more than just the detection technologies. I got involved with working with private meteorologists, working really closely in partnership with the National Weather Service, working with all the, we have 40 local governments that we support. So working with each of those entities, normally through the counties or some of the larger cities, and then growing their capabilities through the years. So that's really been what that's about. The detection network that we have now that's operated with alert technology is around 230 stations. We got over 200 precipitation stations. We got over 100 stream gauges. They're on reservoirs and in dry channels and detention basins and larger reservoirs, not just flood control reservoirs, but water resources facilities around the area. So we've got some pretty heavily monitoring going on, and some of that monitoring evolved from the other uses that came into play. Just water supply was one of them, water quality and all those kind of things. So we've really been part of an evolutionary process, and we've taken advantage of our partners that are part of the National Hydrologic Warning Council to learn from them and to grow the system accordingly.
Great, appreciate it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, for this panel, I really want to talk to you guys about, as the title says, what are the dark secrets? What does it take? What are things people don't always consider when they say we're going to start a flood warning system or we're going to fix ours? So, we do have some questions, and we're going to discuss those as time goes on. But I do really encourage anyone who's watching this webinar at home or at work to submit your own questions. And we'll look through those, and we'll devote some time at the end towards those questions we see, or I'll keep my eye on them as we're going along. And if there's anything that matches what we're talking about, we'll extend it there. So in my first question, and I'll start with Jeff, just kind of going in the same order. If you could give one piece of advice for anyone who wants to start a flood warning system from scratch, what would you say your advice is?
The biggest advice I can give is you need to secure a long-term plan and long-term funding. You can't get a grant and go put these systems in and walk away from them. I've seen it happen time and time again, especially in Central Texas and other locations where folks will put in 10 gauges on a grant after some flood or disaster, and they don't have a long-term funding solution. And without maintenance of these gauges, they're not going to work. They'll work for a while. You'll get 5, maybe even 10 years out of them if you don't touch them. But eventually the rain gauge is not going to work. The water level is not going to work. And the next time something happens, the next time you have a flood and it doesn't work, someone's going to ask, well, we spent money to put this in. Why didn't it work? We need it to work when things are bad. And so it's not on days like when it's sunny that you need to be worried about, is it going to work or not? It's on the days when it's flooding and when the weather's bad that they have to work, especially when people become to rely on it, when people start making decisions on it. And really, if you can showcase the importance of the system, your decision makers, your firefighters, your EMS, your law enforcement, your local elected officials, hey, look at this data when things are happening, when things are going bad, when they have to make decisions, and then they understand then, hey, we need this data, we'll find somehow to fund this data. That's the biggest lesson I think I can give, is you have to have a long-term funding solution.
Yeah, and that's something, like you said, a lot of agencies have struggled with, especially because it's so easy to get funding to put in a system, but trying to get funding to maintain it, it's a lot harder to get approved. Matt, your system is one of the younger systems. It was one of, if not the first, alert to only system. So what did you find maybe that you were not expecting when you started the system, or when you jumped on board and started working with the system at least?
The thing that probably has been really crucial for us, both the original operator before he retired and then myself, and it goes along with what Jeff mentioned, has been really investing in maintenance and developing in-house the skills to troubleshoot all of this, to keep it running, because we've had similar experiences in the region where lots of different government or academic entities have put in weather sensors around the area, be it grants and everything else, and then after a couple of years, they have no ability to maintain them or funding to do so. And so that's been something we've really focused on for us, is working on the maintenance end of it and building that in. And we have also had a lot of success partnering with other agencies where that's what we're offering, where if they're willing to buy Alert 2 hardware, we'll install it and maintain it and operate it for them on our network. And that's been very successful for us. It's allowed us to expand the system faster than we would have solely on our own funding. And it seems so far that everybody's getting a lot of good data out of it, and it's all now hardware that actually has a long-term future, since we're running it and maintaining it.
When that happens, Matt, how does that work for the funding for maintaining it? Do you have any agreements in place, or is it kind of a you bought it, we'll take care of it?
So yeah, we end up doing joint powers agreements with all of the agencies, and basic premises is that they usually buy the original hardware that we spec out for them. Sometimes that causes them a little sticker shock, not used to Alert 2 stuff. But yeah, the general agreements are usually they buy the hardware to our specifications, we install it and maintain it. Long term, most of them we have agreements that they will pay for parts for maintaining them long term. We'll provide the labor and expertise. So a number of agencies, once a year or so, I'll send them an invoice with whatever sensors we replaced or anything like that. And they're usually pretty okay with that long term, since they don't have to come up with the expertise to actually do it. They just have to send us a check occasionally.
Great. Yeah, that's a really both efficient and sustainable way to get more gauges that you can trust the data from in the region.
Yeah, and one of the other reasons we've done that is by us controlling the hardware that we're putting out there, both data quality and reliability, and it also allows me to control inventory on hand for spare parts. With everything largely standardized in the system, it makes it a lot simpler on our end without having a lot of people trying to bring in different hardware and trying to figure out how to support a wider array of hardware out there.
Yeah. Kevin, you've been in the industry kind of almost from its very beginning. So, I am sure you've had plenty of agencies that come to you asking these questions, how do I get started or how do I fix what I've got? What would your words of advice be for them?
Well, you've already heard some really good advice from both Jeff and Matt. And I want to echo on the maintenance side. We do a lot like what Matt does, and we also fund startup projects. But I always tell new folks coming to the business is to commit to the maintenance or don't do it. Don't build yourself a system. What Jeff described, whether it ends in 5 years or 10 years, it'll eventually die on you if you really don't commit to the long term. So be really honest with projecting what those future costs are and kind of know what your funding mechanism is for it. That's pretty important. One thing, if you're just kind of approaching the idea of starting a flood warning system, there's a couple of things. One is I would start with working with emergency management through what they call the THIRA process, which is threat and hazard identification and risk assessment. So it's some FEMA acronym that they came up with for basically mitigation planning and some other things, and also emergency management. But to understand what your risks are, to know your hazards, to build off of events that have happened to you and really make a case for getting involved with a flood warning system, I think you're going to find real positive benefit to cost type numbers by doing a serious THIRA assessment of what your situation is. The other thing I would advise somebody new to the flood warning business to do is to really consult the National Hydrologic Warning Council and its members. There always have been free to all these people that are part of these organizations like NHWC and the AUG, the Alert Users Group out west, and others. They're always free to share their experiences and some of the pitfalls they've run into over time. And you're gonna eliminate a lot of threats to yourself just by talking to some of these people. Maybe attending just one conference would do it, because you're going to build the relationship at that point and stay in touch with these people. And you're going to find the folks out there that have built systems that are along the lines of use that you're thinking about. So take advantage of this idea of having an organization that is focused on the problem. It's gonna save, I think, in time, a lot of money, and may save you a lot of money right from the start of the project.
Yeah, so it sounds like kind of the repeated theme from all three of you guys was at least a little bit touching on maintenance. It's both the long term and installing it and then making sure that there is something in place to keep it going. How do you find people? How do you find staff that are aware of how this works? Because, you know, if you look at a college university, 99% of them aren't going to have a flood warning systems or, you know, hydrologic technician certifications or classes. So how do you find people? Anyone who wants to answer will start there and we can keep going.
Well, our approach in Denver is we've always been an outsourcing organization, a relatively small number of staff. It's a little different in some of the other flood control districts around the country, but we've outsourced everything. So the people that are involved with selling equipment, they may offer maintenance opportunities to you. We work with 2 contractors up here in the Denver area, and they've been provided excellent services over the years. So we rely on the people that know the most about the equipment, and then they're good at going into the universities, hiring the right kind of workers that they need and training them. And you know, for us, you know, we have limited staff capabilities to really spend that kind of time doing the training. We just don't have a large staff, so we kind of count on our contractors to have the right people employed that can provide the services that we're looking for.
What about you? Sorry, go ahead, Jeff. I know your system,
Well,
so the Harris County system almost does the opposite. You've got a full staff of, I'm not even sure how many technicians. So what's your take on that, Jeff?
Yeah, we're opposite of Kevin, and you know, Kevin's probably one of the bigger systems that does the contract maintenance. You know, it makes a lot of sense for a smaller system, you know, 20, 30 gauges, to contract the maintenance out, because it's not maybe necessarily a full-time job for an individual to take care of 15 or 20 gauges. But when you start getting up in the hundreds of gauges, like we have here, you know, we've always invested in staff, and when you invest in staff, you have to invest in training staff, and you have to invest in the training of staff as technology changes. And so when you look back 10 years and what was required of an individual that worked on the flood warning system and what's required today, you know, 10 years ago, it was screwdrivers and doing little switches on a transmitter. Today, it's hooking up your laptop with a cable and programming a transmitter. And that's a significant advancement for an individual, you know, like myself, who has actually no clue how to do any sort of programming. And that's what's kind of being required in some of this stuff today. And especially when you start looking at the RQ30s and the different sensors that are coming out. You know, you asked the question about where do you find folks? There's no, you know, alert college out there or you know, place like that where you can just go get people. It's not quite as simple as, you know, the engineering field or some of the other fields that are out there. We've had a lot of success in folks that are genuinely in the earth science field, so geography, maybe hydrology, that type of field. Some of ex-military folks that have training, especially on the electric side of stuff. So when you're dealing, you know, you're dealing with solar panels and batteries and power budgets and that type of thing, we've had success there too. And so, you know, one of the biggest things for anybody trying to hire something in this field is the attention to detail. And usually when you go out to a site and for whatever reason, let's say the power budget's low, you know, your first thought, oh, is the solar panel charging? Is the battery bad? What's the issue here? And we used to be very reactive. We used to go out there, switch out the battery, come back and hope it worked. And now today, it's a little bit of the opposite. We go out there, we check the entire power budget, we check the solar panel, we check the connections. And a lot of times the issue is something very, very small that is very easily overlooked. And so anybody in this field, it's a very detail-oriented field, and it's a field like most of the sciences is, where there's not always an easy answer, and sometimes it's not just one answer. Sometimes it's multiple things that can contribute to something going wrong. And so an attention to detail is really important.
So just a follow-up question from the audience, you know, having trained so many technicians, how long does that usually take before, you know, from hiring to they're on their own and you can trust them to fix the gauge, and kind of what is that process?
You know, for us here, it's about 2 years. It's about an 18 to 24 month learning curve, but you're never really done learning. And that's because technology is continuing to advance, and in this field at a very rapid pace. And so the amount of training and the amount of time we spend on training, and training is really important, that you have technicians that they know what they're doing when they go out there, because you don't want them, in some cases like Kevin, he has sites that are hundreds of miles away. The drive time up there is very long. You spend an entire day getting there and coming back. You don't want somebody going up there and not fixing the problem, and then when you need it to work, it doesn't work. And so it's really important to invest in that up front and get that training, and it's continuous. It doesn't end.
Yeah, no, it is. It's the industry is constantly changing, so you've got to have technicians that are constantly learning and training as well. What about you, Matt? You know, you're kind of your one-man show down there, but
Yeah.
you have quite a few gauges. So, you know, how do you staff up appropriately for that?
Yeah, I think both the thinking back to the backgrounds of both myself and the original operator, it's going to echo a lot of what Jeff said. I think the most important thing in selecting people is there is no single credential for this, or probably even single background that really prepares you. But the most important thing is probably the troubleshooting aspect of it, how someone troubleshoots, and being able to figure out and understand root causes. Otherwise, you're just treating symptoms, and that will cause you problems with reliability long term. And we have some of the similar issues like with Kevin, where we're covering a county that's larger than some states back east. So I've got some, mountaintop repeater sites that are, it's a full day of travel just to the site and back. So you've got to be able to be useful once you get on site. And that for us, it's been a process of developing that knowledge, even things over the last couple of years, refining what we carry on the truck to make sure you have what you need when you get out there. And for us, I know when I came on board, it felt like it probably took about 6 months to a year before I really felt like I was beginning to anticipate problems rather than just reacting to them in the data. And that, I think that just takes time training people into it, experience running it, and more time and effort understanding root causes. We also lean very heavily on the expertise of our system integrators. On our repeater sites, we work closely with our county's radio shop that runs the public safety radio network that we piggyback off of. I work closely with our IT folks on the networking side. That's a big part of it, is that I'm not trying to come up with all the answers on my own. I'm pulling in all the expertise I can from other areas to help with that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we've got a common question as well, kind of saying that for them it takes about a year of working with alert to equipment, and some of it's just the sites, knowing how to get to them safely, knowing how things are installed, kind of learning the feel of your system.
Yeah, and I thought in our hiring process that when we went through the interview questions and all that, and we're actually going to be gearing up early next year to hire a second person to work with me. For us, I think the two most important interview questions were asking about troubleshooting. And that's a question where there's not necessarily a lot of right or wrong answers, but you're really interested in seeing how somebody thinks about troubleshooting. And then for us, where we're such a big, remote, large area, the second most important question is probably making sure how someone feels about working in remote places alone. For me, it turns out a surprisingly important part of the job is not getting lost, not getting stuck, and not unnecessarily beating up the truck or anything like that, because we're out there in the middle of nowhere on your own. So it's whatever you can do out there. There's not necessarily anyone to call for help quickly or anything like that. There's no one to hear you scream out there. So
yeah, no, and that's always something that can be a problem. Kevin, do you ever have issues working with the with contractors on your system, with how remote some of your sites are? I know a lot of those people you work with are actually contractors who are somewhat local, but you know, has that ever caused any issues, or has anything worked out even better because of that, Kevin?
Well, you know, we monitor the data real closely, and we do a lot of QA/QC on it. So we're looking for problems pretty much on a daily basis. Inside my agency, we're not always catching the problems. We've got outside groups looking at them too. So that's good. We know fairly early if some immediate attention is needed at one of the sites. The contractors do a good job. Their contracts specify response times, and they have consistently stayed within those response times. So if, for example, if you have a problem at a repeater or a base station, you pretty much have a rapid response system in place. And because our contractors are local, they can get to the sites fairly quickly, and we have the network. It's a large network, but it's divided up in such a way that the different groups are focused on gauges within their area, within the area that they're familiar with, and can move fairly rapidly to resolve problems. So I would say we really haven't struggled with that. We've depended on them to fulfill their obligations under the agreements.
Okay, great. You know, Kevin, you mentioned data management and looking at the data. My next question for you, Kevin, is, you know, how do you share that data with partnering agencies? How do you work with the local National Weather Service office? How do you manage all that data, and how much time does that take? How much percentage, you know, what type of work is that? Yeah,
so we have different collection platforms, and we have backup systems and redundancy. So for example, on the Novastar platforms, we've got 2 or 3 platforms collecting data on that side. We have data being collected on the Contrail side. So if one system goes down, the other one's probably, we can recover data, or we can go to the other system and find it. It hasn't really been, I mean, we've worked really hard on having the data integrity intact, and that goes back to the maintenance side of it as well. I mean, there's data maintenance as much as there is field maintenance of sensors, so that's important. As far as access to the data, we try to keep that as open access as we can. There's people in the know that are basically, people learn how to do this. We do trainings on our website on how to acquire data downloads fairly quickly. We get lots of requests for data and information to be sent, and if we can point them to our website and they can accomplish the task in 30 minutes, then we've saved a lot of time. So that's what we've, at least I personally have spent a lot of time on, is having a website that's actually usable, and you can get to almost any record you want, dating back as far as 1986. So that's a pretty long-term record. And then we do data scrubbing on it too. So when we have a special activity underway that's looking at a certain part of the data, for example, if you're doing analysis on annual peaks on your stream gauges, and you've got, in our case, a number of our stream gauges have over 30 years of record. So we have a statistically significant record that we want people to have access to. So we pay our contractors to not just maintain equipment in the field, but to maintain easy access to that kind of information, and do the QA/QC on the product that you can download from the internet. So most of the data requests I get, I can point people to a very specific place, and probably with a click or two, they have what they need. So that's helped a lot. Otherwise, we'd probably, at the district, we'd be needing to hire more people just to handle information requests.
Sure. Yeah. Kind of bridging from that, Jeff, you have a background in meteorology, and you work very, very closely with your local NWS office, National Weather Service office. So, tell us a little bit about that relationship and your data sharing with that office.
Yeah, we do a lot of the same stuff Kevin was talking about. We have an FTP set up with not only the National Weather Service, our local office here in Houston, Galveston, but also at the River Forecast Center up in Fort Worth. So both of them are getting our direct data feeds sent in, along with numerous other jurisdictions and even private companies. We have it to the level now where there's a chemical plant or a petrochemical plant on one of our bayous, and they wanted to ingest the data so they could build their own dashboard internally based on the gauge upstream of them. And so we do a lot of that. Yeah, and Kevin's right, you know, that we get questioned, asked constantly all the time for large chunks of data. Hey, can you send me 5-minute rainfall data for all of your gauges for the last 30 years? I mean, just the amount of data that is massive. And so we're currently working on our public facing website to make that much more on the requester side of things, of how you get that data instead of us doing it, let them download it. But our public facing website is probably one of our biggest uses in the area. Our TV stations, TV meteorologists here use it very heavily. They've actually, one of the stations is actually gets our data and has built graphics on our data. And that's something relatively new. But the amount of people that use the website during a big event is very substantial. And so sometimes we even struggle with keeping the website up and going. And like Matt was saying, we have a whole team of IT folks for the county that work on this. They help with our repeater connections and making sure we have, you know, backup cell stuff at our repeaters. And then in the same thing with servers, they expand, they get bigger, I guess, or whatever, when we have bad weather coming, so we can take the amount of traffic onto the website. And so without that, because the main focus probably of our group is more so on the data coming in, does it look right, making sure the data is right, and then turning it over to those IT folks and making sure that you get that data from your platform, ours is Contrail, and you're somehow able to disseminate it out to everybody. Because if you can't do that, then that means everybody's going to rely on you. And when something's going bad, that's really hard for everybody to rely on one or two people. And so you have to have some sort of platform to get this out to the world. One of the other things we've done on our website is we allow people to go in and sign up for alarms. So you can go in and create an account and say, hey, at this gauge, when it hits this or when it rains this much, send me a text message or an email. And that's been really great because, again, it puts it back to the user of, hey, I don't know what you want. You go sign up for what you want and you put it on the platform you want it to go on. So that's been really, you know, something changed. Putting that on the public facing website instead of us managing it on the Contrail side of things, which was the previous way we used to do it. So.
And just for clarification, those, you know, you say sharing data with the public, those flood advisories, flood warnings, those all come from the National Weather Service office. You guys do no official warnings yourself, correct?
No, we do not. We work closely with the Weather Service office. There's something called NWS chat. We're usually in there talking. We do have a flood forecasting effort that has been going on for about 2 years here in Harris County. And we're getting to the point now, we've been working really closely with the River Forecast Center and the National Weather Service because they are the agency that is mandated, if you will, to provide public warning. And so we have to walk a very fine line of, if we're producing forecasts, we don't want to contradict a weather service forecast in the same location. And so we work very closely with them, but we're getting to that point now where we will be able to generate forecast for our gauge sites in the future. And you know, that partnership with the Weather Service and how that product is going to go out, how that product's going to look, and the rapid, I guess, expansion in the last few years of inundation mapping, which is you don't necessarily have to know the elevation of the gauge. So a lot of people told us during Harvey, well, the gauge said it was 59 feet. I don't know the elevation of my house, so I don't know what 59 feet means to me. But if you give them an inundation map, they can kind of see, okay, blue is underwater, water is over there. I know where my house is. I can see how close the water is. And so we're looking right now at potentially forecast inundation mapping into the future with our forecasting efforts. So you have to have the coordination. Kevin will tell you that you have to have the coordination with not only the Weather Service, not only your media partners. You got to have your media partners involved too, but also your emergency managers and your elected officials. You have to have the coordination with all of them to get this information out and so folks can make the decisions they need to make.
Great. Yeah, Kevin, did you have a comment you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how I could add much to what Jeff just said. The only thing we do different in Denver than what Harris County is doing, we've been providing forecast services to our local governments, not to the public directly, but through our local governments in partnership with the National Weather Service for 43 years. So a big part of our flood warning services is the Met support services that we provide. So that's one thing. The other thing, relative to the data and the access and assuring that it's there, that partnership with the Weather Service is critical. If you're in a alert system type data provider, you need to have your system connected with the national system that goes into and finds places. MesoWest will find you. If you can go into the MesoWest, which has lots and lots of data from lots and lots of sources, that's through the National Weather Service pipeline. And there's a lot of alert system data in that. You need, I think that's one connectivity you want to make as clean as you can. What that can do for you, at least, let's say your system becomes overloaded or burdened, at least the National Weather Service is assured of having all that information, that they can put out information to the public, get the news stations giving the right information, having a consistent message, that kind of thing. So don't forget about our partners at the Weather Service when it comes to how you package and disseminate your data packages, because it's a big deal to them. They use it all the time. They're effective using it. Again, we have a private meteorologist, but their goal is to wake up the local government system. That three-way partnership that Jeff clearly defined, and that really is a local, federal, in our case, a regional partnership. And I think the same thing is true for counties the size of Harris County and the flood control district there. Other ones like Matt's, I'd like to hear from Matt on what he's dealing with in Las Cruces.
Yeah, that brings up some interesting points. And like you guys mentioned, for us, the partnership with the National Weather Service is critical. We're exporting all of our data to MesoWest. We're also on NWS chat, working with them, and that's been successful with us. We don't have in-house forecasting capabilities yet, and down here in southern New Mexico, we don't get atmospheric rivers or even significant spring runoff. All of our flooding concerns are almost entirely monsoon season, intense localized thunderstorms during the summer. But there's probably a hydrologist in our future at the Flood Commission, because we're at the point where we're collecting a lot of data with the flood warning system, but we're probably just starting to scratch the surface of what we can do with it. But we have been working, the local National Weather Service office is an important relationship. As I've started working more closely with them, it has been fruitful to where at times we've been able to have them kind of modify their own internal alerting and their own internal triggers for issuing watches and warnings in public products based on the data that we're getting in real time, along with our knowledge of local flood control structures and what those risks are. There's a number of communities where, depending on what's going on and how much it's rained recently, we'll work with them and kind of change how they're looking at that data for what they're putting out publicly, telling people. We're also working very closely with the emergency management folks. We're still developing that relationship and formalizing it. But those are the primary users of our data at this point, is the emergency management folks, and that's coming from a small, one or two of us here at the Flood Commission that are communicating that to a small circle of emergency management folks, as well as the National Weather Service. We're starting to work on formalizing, our data is all out there publicly accessible, at least the raw data. We're not pushing out alarming yet outside of a small circle of folks. But that's for us an area of working on is getting it to wider use, public use, of understanding what's out there. And especially once I get an assistant, that's going to be something I'll focus on more in even some of our contrail website design, looking at, making that a little more friendly for public users, because we've quickly realized that how we use it internally is probably very different than the general public is looking at Contrail and trying to figure out how to actually get down into the weeds of all the data we have out there.
Yeah, and you started, Matt, kind of right when everyone started going home, or not long before that. So how did that impact, I guess, your introduction to everything, and just in general, running your kind of one-man show? What percentage of work is field work and what percentage of work is everything else?
Yeah, for me, it's probably about 50-50 field work, everything else. It kind of, for us, it varies on season. I've kind of designed a maintenance program where we're doing full inspection and maintenance visits on all of our gauge sites twice a year, usually in the spring and fall, which are kind of our quiet seasons, and over the winter. The winter's kind of when we're focusing on system upgrades. So that time of the year, I'll spend more time outside. During the summer, I'll shift to much more of a monitoring mode, so that I am available for when things are going on. Usually for us, it's almost always in the late afternoon and through the overnight hours. So that's kind of how I break it up down here. But yeah, there's never a shortage of things to do, either in office or out in the field for me as a one-man show.
Sure. I'm just going to quickly state we're about 10 minutes until 1 o'clock, and we'll go a little bit long as our panelists are available, just because we started a little late. But I want to jump off of something Matt just said, and I'll point this towards Jeff first. Maintenance can be a full-time job, but at the same time, eventually, you clean your rain gauge enough, or there's not a flood event. So how do you keep yourself or your staff busy during those off periods, and how do you make sure that your system is still going to work when it floods?
Yeah, that's a good question. For us here, we've always been saying, well, what are we going to do when we get everything done? And it's funny because you never really get everything done. We're at a really good place now. We've finally gotten to a place where we're not having to go out to these gauges very often. We're actually being very meticulous. We're probably being more critical of it than maybe we need to be, to the point where we're replacing the bubbles, the leveling bubbles on the rain gauges. We're to that point now, it's changing the mindset of the technicians from, hey, I go and work on gauges and I go deal with that stuff, to what else is there that can be done? Can you look at the RQ30 data and the flow velocity data and the rating curves that we have, and how can you put that together to help the forecasting system that we have? And there's always documentation that needs to be done. We have a work order system that we're currently uploading all of our past paper work order, past site inspection reports into, so it becomes all digital. And a lot of us who've been doing this for a long time, we have paper records, we have paper everything going back, paper high watermarks. And how do you digitize that and get it into platforms now that they can be used, specifically in GIS, that they can be used in the future? And so we're doing a lot of kind of internal projects. We have time now to test equipment that we bring in from the field. A couple weeks ago, a construction site took one of our radars off the side of the bridge, knocked it off, and instead of just sending it back to the manufacturer, we're actually testing it here in-house to make sure that it works, and if it's fine, we'll put it back out there when we need to. But doing a lot of that, where in years past we didn't have time. We were out there trying to get things fixed, trying to get things to work. And now when you're at that point, you're kind of at that steady state point. It is, how do you keep it at that steady state point? When you replaced a lot of the equipment, that's fine, it's going to work very well. But over time, the system will begin to degrade again. Even with maintenance, even with good maintenance, the system will begin to degrade. And so you have to have that long-term plan of, hey, is it every 5 or 6 years you're going to go out there and swap out all your batteries? Because as they charge and recharge, they start to lose their capacity. So is that a 5 or 6 year plan where you go swap out all the batteries? A big part of what we do is surveying, and surveys can easily get off. If you're talking about water level all the equipment that goes along with measuring water and measuring the aspects of flooding. It's all about surveys and benchmarks. Benchmarks get destroyed because of construction. Sites have to be moved because of construction. And so we have to go out there, put those in. And then also working in the case of Harris County, we're getting ready to get brand new floodplains here after Harvey. So when those new floodplains come out, our gauge data is no longer matching what we have with the floodplain. So we're not apples to apples. So we're going to have to re-level our entire network and all the data that goes with it. That's the rating curves, the historic data, everything. And that's a big effort. And so there's usually no shortage of work in the mindset of what you think about when you think about the whole process that it goes through. But if you think about just maintaining the gauges, yeah, you can get to that steady state type of point.
One question from the audience was basically, how do your organizations replace flood gauges or evaluate new technologies? If you have a piece of equipment, do you try to get similar to make sure it's all the same? But at the end of the day, there might be something better out there. That how much are you not trying out something new because you're just trying to keep the same stock? How do you get funding for testing that stuff? So anyone that wants to jump in on that, I think it's a great question.
We have enough resources in Denver, financial resources and the strong political support behind it to have some buffer money every year, unless we've had a major flood and it requires a commitment on replacement that uses up the budget. And then we always have some emergency funds that are available to tap as well, or some other special project funds. So, having those kind of financial resources, at least for us in Denver, has not been a problem.
Yeah, and I'll kind of echo what Kevin said. We're sort of the same way here. We have, vendors will come to us and say, hey, we got this new rain gauge. We've tried rain gauges. Actually, Mark, you've helped us with comparing some of our tipping buckets to the non-tipping bucket rain gauges. And there's pros and cons to it. A lot of the limitations with some of the new stuff that comes on is we're still a legacy radio transmission system. And so a lot of the new stuff wants to go towards cell or satellite transmissions, and that's great and wonderful. But we're hesitant down here. We're in hurricane country, and when we have a hurricane, the first thing that goes is the cell. And so we have to make sure that our system works and can work during that time. And so a lot of this kind of transition towards cell with a lot of the stuff we're a little bit hesitant about, because we need it to work when we have a hurricane. And I'm not talking about a flood, I'm talking about a hurricane. And then one of the other things that we've kind of been drug into is, we're really just creeks and bayous and channels, but it's street flooding. And, can we put out these relatively inexpensive sensors to monitor street flooding? And so we've tried some of that here. We've had success with it. But we have tens and tens of thousands of streets here, and so putting a sensor on each one of those streets really doesn't make financial sense at all. And then also trying to maintain that, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for us here in the Houston area. And so we're going more towards the use of radar overlaid on top of our street system to say, hey, we think we probably have street flooding here. It's not going to be 100% right, but neither is putting thousands and thousands of sensors out on streets. They're not going to be 100% right either. So, there's a lot. We have a test site. We do a lot of testing. And, honestly, probably one of the biggest things, like somebody said earlier, is going to the conferences, talking to the vendors, talking to other people. Oh, hey, I got this new rain gauge. Oh yeah, why is that special? Why is it different from my tipping bucket? Well, I'll tell you why. This is how. And that word of mouth and spreading around through the industry, talks like this is probably one of the ways we hear about some new stuff, and how we, then we'll go, oh, we'll go try it. We'll get with the vendor. Hey, can we borrow, test something out here for 6 months or so and see how it works? And so that's kind of how a lot of our stuff has happened.
Yeah, we had two comments drop. One is that a lot of times vendors are happy to give you something to try out and play with and try to integrate in your system. And another great comment was the fact that the USGS also does their own testing at the HIF, and they do very intensive. They have very high standards, and if you talk to or work with your local USGS office, that's another partner to reach out to learn about new technologies. Matt, have you, working with such a fresh system, you kind of got to start without dealing with the problems of alert, but I'm wondering, since the system started just a couple of years ago, have there been any big technological changes?
Yes, actually. So we've very much tried to stay on the standardized hardware thing, but just even in that time, our system was originally built on Campbell Scientific RTUs throughout the entire system, and we have now been transitioning to High Sierra RTUs, and so that's been a process. And especially what Kevin and Jeff mentioned, that's been important for us is the ability to have a test site. We built a test weather station at our maintenance shop, and that has proved invaluable for actually both testing and troubleshooting. For us, the change to RTUs brought some different sensors, so it gave me a place to essentially play with those and understand how they were going to work before we were actually relying on the data. And it's also proved really handy having a test setup here where when we've had hardware and other sites that is sometimes suspect or having intermittent problems, I can bring it and set it up 100 feet from my office and really test it and play with it and understand what it's doing in a functional environment without having to potentially drive half a day to get to the site or anything like that.
Yeah, no, it sounds like, another repeated theme is having a close by test site to try things out.
Yeah, and for us, the testing has proved valuable so that when we are integrating new hardware, we are, whether we're sampling some or buying a small quantity to understand how it works before we're fully committing to evolving it into the system in the future, so that we're not, taking a gamble and buying a whole bunch of equipment and then wind up a year down the road, perhaps not as happy with it as we thought we would be.
Great. Yeah, just a quick last question to finish us off. We'll start with Jeff and go around. What would you say has been the best part, the most fulfilling part of doing this type of work and made you feel like, this was worth it? And what's been the hardest part? What's been, kind of the roses and thorns? What's been the good and the bad? Go ahead, Jeff.
The hardest part, Mark, is change. That's probably with everything. It's changing equipment. It's changing mindset. It's changing technology. That's the hardest part. And you have to have support. You have to have management support. I don't think we talk a lot about management support, but you have to have a champion of this, and they have to support it. They have to support the technicians. They have to support the funding stream. They have to make sure that they're out there making it clear what this does, how it works, why it's important, all those types of things. And so you need that. And that was one of the difficult things. What has been the most rewarding? When it works, when you have a flood, when you have a Harvey, and millions of people are relying on your system. Millions of people are relying on what you have done to make decisions, in some cases life and death decisions. And when you think about it, you don't think about it usually on a day-to-day basis when you're out there working on a gauge or whatever. And most of us in government, we don't get a lot of thank yous for what we do. It's sort of a thankless job. But there is satisfaction knowing that what we do makes a difference and what we do matters, especially in a lot of people's very worst times in their lives.
Yeah, wow, thanks, Jeff. Kevin, what would you say has been the best and the worst?
Well, might as well start with the worst first. The worst is just kind of relative to everything else you do, but for me, it's been maintaining high interest in routine uses of the data from our technical community, getting people trained up in a way that they can make use of this data in their daily work activities. There's ways to do this. If you're maintaining a good archive record, there's ways to do that. What that'll do, that'll build interest in the system. It'll gain familiarity. When it comes to the flood, you have kind of people geared up and already understand how to make use of the display and data retrieval functions that are out there. That's been kind of the hardest thing to do, and you can always do more when it comes to technical trainings. I don't think I can find anybody that would disagree with that. We all wish we could do a little bit more. On the rewards side, there's so many rewards. I mean, Jeff pointed to Harvey and what the community of Houston and that whole portion of Texas really experienced in Harvey, which was phenomenal. It was also phenomenal from the standpoint of how the system performed in Harris County. For us, it was the 2013 floods. $4 billion in flood losses. We had over 1,000 landslides in Boulder County alone, I think. So there was we're still recovering from that 2013 disaster declaration. And that's going to go on for a while. But it was also rewarding because the system worked. People were depending on it. We had people out of town when that flood struck. It was a late season flood. It was in September. We'd committed to what we've been doing for a long time prior, so we just kept building on it. I happened to be in town, but most of the other stormwater engineers, if you will, the people that work for the local governments that we serve here at the district, were up in Steamboat Springs, Colorado at a conference. So that's what happened during our floods. Yet they had all the information coming in because there was alarms being sent out. They were getting them on their cell phones. They were knowing to call their office. They were able to re-engage from some distance away from home and then plan their trip back so that they could deal with the disaster when they returned. So that was a rewarding thing. The other thing is, when you have a storm like what we had in 2013 or Hurricane Harvey or many of the ones you've seen recently, you get a lot of national news attention. Well, one of the things that was reported by CBS News during our floods is that flood warning system, it was a headline, flood warning system saves hundreds of lives. Now, whether that was true or not, I could argue some point and counterpoints. There was way more than just the detection network that we had and the forecasting and the notification processes. It was really about the engagement with the community of public safety people, emergency managers, law enforcement, sheriff's offices, sheriffs and police chiefs and fire chiefs throughout the whole area that really made the fatality rate so low during our 2013 floods. So I think that's really what led to the kind of headline we got nationally. And as you know, with news reports, it's whatever's exciting to view and watch and attract viewers. May not tell the whole story, but I think that's a rewarding thing. You asked us a question when to try to prepare us, and what I liked your last question on the list, which was final words of wisdom or whatever, and things that came to my mind are things Jeff has already commented on. But you need to be a good listener. You need to be available to people. You're in a position to build relationships. Don't forget about that. The people side of our business is just as important, if not more important, than what we do with the data. The data is important. Don't get me wrong, but if without the relationship, you're not going to get the proper use of the data and the response to the information that's being shared. The other thing is, and Jeff pointed this out pretty clearly, is the championship. Take ownership in what you have. The people, all of you guys that are on this call, and I would venture to say most of the listeners out there are really committed to what we're doing. So take ownership in what you're doing, and over time, as you build your relationships, you will become the trusted agent. They will go to you for information. I know Jeff experienced this personally during Hurricane Harvey and the kind of social media stuff that he was putting out there. He got a lot of notoriety just with one storm, one big monster storm. But that can happen to any of us at any time. The time to build the relationship isn't during the storm. It's prior to the storm. It's anticipating what's to come, learning from people that have experienced these kind of things before and the hardships they've faced, and recovery is going to be an issue, but you're there to support it and you're there to learn from it, and you can basically become an educator. The public will look to you as somebody who's knowledgeable about floods. Whether they know that you run an alert system or not isn't so important. You become a trusted agent for advice and what to do to be safe. So I think that's the most rewarding thing I can think of from being involved with this type of work for the last 37 years.
Great, thanks. Matt, do you want to finish us off? Any words of wisdom or pros and cons that you've experienced?
Yeah, again, it's similar to what they've said. The best part has probably been the satisfaction during storm events and during flood events of knowing that we're able to actually provide hard data that's useful. And in some instances, we've been able, I've been able to push out to the small emergency management group. I'm looking at data in the middle of the night as things happening and being able to tell them there's going to be a lot of water in this spot. It's going to move in a certain direction. You guys are going to have to start dealing with this, being able to provide that data in real time. The challenges, and it ties into much what Kevin said, is building relationships. Has been something I've had to work on a lot, because we don't operate in a vacuum, and especially a system like ours, we're entirely for reliability, we're doing radio repeaters, and we've been working on building in a lot of redundancy, IP redundancy at all repeater and base station sites. We're adding the second base station and standalone server network and ISP connections. We're working through that now, but has been building relationships with particularly IT folks, to the point to where if we have a problem, troubleshooting issue that turns out to be an IT infrastructure problem, our base stations aren't talking to servers or something like that, building up the relationships is taking some effort with IT to where I actually have numbers to call and people who will answer at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning when something has gone down and it's been troubleshooted to to an IT infrastructure network. So there's been a lot of effort in building those relationships, and to where people trust you that when you do call them, in the middle of the night, you're doing so with a good reason.
Right.
And I would very much also echo what they had said. It requires taking ownership of your system, and you've got to have a champion for it. I'm lucky to have very, very good management support, and we have really stable, dedicated funding streams. And that's also, the funding aspect has been a learning curve for me coming into. For me, this is the first professional role where I've had significant budget responsibility. So learning to forecast out in advance system evolutions, upgrades, there's definitely a learning curve to thinking that far enough ahead that I'm in a position where I can usually get the money to spend to expand the system or upgrade when we need to, but planning that out a year or a couple of years in advance turns out to be critically important.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the discussion from everyone. I think some of our key takeaways of the dark secrets of running a network were, one, you've got to plan for maintenance. You've got to plan for the funding for maintenance and the staff for maintenance, or the contracts in place to make sure your system's maintained. Another key topic we discussed is data management and the time that takes, and that ties really, really closely into relationships. Knowing your neighboring agencies, knowing your national partners, knowing that if something goes wrong, you have a phone number you can call. And then, in conclusion, also that star person, that management support, that person who says, I'm going to make sure the system works no matter what, and that this is my system, and this is my job is to make sure it works. And so I think each of those realistically almost warrants its own webinar, and trying to fit all three of them into an hour is just, it's not something that works. And so I'm really hesitant to call it to a close, but I know that we have to go back to our schedules, and we're a little bit over if we're ending at 1. So I am going to go ahead and end it here, but I do appreciate both everyone who attended and our 3 panelists. And this will be recorded, and it will be put on our YouTube channel with all of our previous talks. And I certainly could see something like this happening again, where we dive deeper into any of these individual topics. So with that, I'll let everyone say their final goodbyes, but I appreciate everyone that showed up today. Thank you. All right, take care, everyone.
Bye.